And hello and welcome to Father Spitzer's Universe, the place in our universe where faith and reason intersect and sometimes collide. I'm Doug Keck, your host, coming to you from our studios at EWTN in Irondale, Alabama on Mother Angelica Way, where it all began, the mothership as they'd say. Today's topic, Chapter 3 of Father's latest book, and the chapter is I Am With You, always recognizing God's presence in our suffering. And of course the book is The Light Shines On in the Darkness, Transforming Suffering Through Faith. And you can check it out through EWTN's religious catalog, EWTNRC.com, if you want to follow along with us. We're going to be going through the book over the next few shows. You can also email us questions at spitzer'suniverse@EWTN.com. Post your questions on Facebook at facebook.com/EWTN online, hashtag FSUniverse. Send us a tweet at twitter.com/EWTN, hashtag FSUniverse. All things Father Spitzer can be found online at the Magis Center, one word, .com. And just wanted to remind you, as we come up on July 4th and the end of the Fourth Night for Freedom, we got the Convocation of Catholic Leaders from July 1st to the 4th that EWTN will be airing from Orlando, hosted by Jeanette Bankovic, anchored, and also by Jonathan Reyes, Dr. Jonathan Reyes from the USCCB. Look for more information on that on EWTN.com on our website. Again, the convocation coming up next week. And don't forget Mother Angelica's Quick Guide to the Sacraments. It's the latest book in the series published by EWTN Publishing, now available again through our catalog. And with that all said, we will move on to the heart of the matter. Father Spitzer from the West Coast Studios in Orange County, California. And we see Father Spitzer slowly coming into focus as we once more get in touch with him. And Father, how are you doing? I heard you were telling me a little bit before the show, your voice is a little bit maybe raspy, a little worse for wear, but you're going to soldier through, as they say, right?
I'm gonna soldier through, exactly. But it's come back pretty nicely. Okay. So yeah, I got a little bit of a cough back in Minnesota, and but now, as I say, substantially over it.
Okay, good. Well, we don't want any more emails about people complaining over the fact that I'm abusing your voice too much, and then you give Father a break and have a cup of water. So we want to make sure there's plenty of water, and maybe Joan's got some lozenges for you as well to keep you going, because we have a plethora of questions coming your way. And don't forget, again, we've got the 4 books that are part of the quartet. The one we are talking about is the one second from the left on your screen as you're looking at, audience left and stage right, as they would say. So again, Light Shines On in the Darkness is the one and I have to make sure that is not Father Mitch before he shoots one of his elk in the woods. That actually is a famous St. Hubert's image that people can find out about as well. And so we started talking about it over the last couple of weeks of the books, and moving chapter by chapter, and we're going to be getting into chapter 3. But first, we always have some questions from people based on our programs from the last couple of weeks. And here's one person wrote to us, and we like to address things like this, and maybe we can explain a little bit. This person writes, some emails submitted to Father Spitzer's Universe at EWTN aren't getting answered. I submitted an important email concerning the degree of our Lord's great suffering and my son's great suffering while losing his battle with cancer, but no reply. Thank you. God bless Chris. And we just wanted to mention to our audience in general that we try to obviously answer as many questions on the air, or we can possibly do, but we have to say that we cannot guarantee that if you do ask a question, it will in fact get answered, certainly on the air. And sometimes some questions, though obviously unique to that person's life, can be similar effectively in what the issue is or how the answer might go. So I just wanted to say that. Do you want to say something, Father, in that regard?
Sure. I mean, as I was saying in our last program, and with respect to a slightly different question, is that yes, there can be times for sure when we think, okay, I've got a just petition that I've given to the Lord, and He didn't answer my prayer, and my son did die of cancer, and I am grieving terribly over this, and of course I I understand the grief, and understand what it's like to lose a battle. But at the same time, we just have to have, that trust in the Lord to believe that, first of all, your son is with him right now, and secondly, that he knows what he's doing if he's not going to perform a miracle. And in the context of that last question, I gave three little kind of parameters to think about when prayers are not being answered. And you think, well, this was such a great prayer. Why wouldn't God answer this one? Number one, it may have something to do with, his salvation. That we don't know what his future was. We don't know what would have happened if he had recovered from that cancer. We don't know what would happen if he had been given a miracle. Something might have happened that might have been good, or it might have been something that would interfere with his salvation. God knows, but we do not know. Mm-hmm. The second thing that's important is that your son Chris, his salvation touches a lot of other people, and specifically not just them, but their salvation. And the Lord is always going to move down the path that is going to help people and help him to help people toward their salvation. He's not going to alleviate suffering that doesn't necessarily, or certainly that would interfere with, his or somebody else's salvation. The third thing that we talked about was, Jesus just can't do a miracle every single time a request goes up. There are probably going up from the earth right now at least 1 million requests per minute. 1 million requests per minute. Now just imagine for a second that the Lord is performing a miracle to try and give miraculous cures to all 1 million of these requests per minute. For all intents and purposes, there would be more manifestations of miracles on the earth than there would be natural laws. Okay. And of course, if everything is going to be miraculous, you would never know from moment to moment what is going to happen to you. I mean, as a matter of fact, you could just lay back on your laurels, right? Everybody could, because instead of thinking, I'm probably not going to get a miracle, maybe I have to contend with this suffering, maybe I have to learn something from this suffering, maybe I have to offer this suffering up for the souls of other people, maybe I have to, there's something I need to learn in terms of being shocked out of my superficiality, or maybe to learn to deepen my trust in God, or to learn to deepen my love, my compassion, my empathy, my humility. Instead of thinking that, you'd think, hey, God gives everybody else a miracle, I'm going to get a miracle. Lord, just relieve this suffering, please. And then it gets relieved. Good. I don't have to learn anything from the suffering. I'm in great shape. I'm already on the path to salvation. And anytime anything comes up, I'm going to get a miracle. Now you say, are you being kind of, sarcastic in responding to me? No. I totally mean this literally. God can't do it if we're going to learn something, a miracle every minute, if we're going to learn something from our suffering. God can't do a miracle every minute if we're even going to have a sense of what is coming up in our future, which is absolutely necessary in order for us to be free. God can't do this if he's going to lead an optimal number of people to salvation, because suffering is so integral to detaching us from ourselves, detaching us from pleasure, detaching us from superficiality, and helping us to attach to what's really important: faith and hope and love, and the greatest of these is love. So God can't simply be answering prayers all the time. And so when he's not answering prayers, and when we think, oh gosh, this is such a just cause, my one thought is we have to default to what every Catholic defaults to. what am I supposed to learn from this suffering? What's my son supposed to learn from this suffering? What are we as a family supposed to get out of this suffering collectively toward our salvation, towards love, towards humility, towards empathy, towards compassion for others? What are we supposed to get out of this suffering vis-a-vis, bearing under it well? Should we be offering this suffering for the souls like St. Therese of Lisieux or St. Paul himself? Should we be offering this suffering for the souls around the world? For all intents and purposes, we want then that suffering God wants that suffering, not just we want that suffering to be optimally helpful to our salvation, others' salvation, our love, our faith, others' love, others' faith, just to get us out of superficiality, to reverse us when we're on a self-destructive path, so that all of us will be able to get into heaven together. And suffering's going to be integral to that. And plus, we don't want to force God to simply, do a miracle every second in order for us to believe that he's present and faithful. We do have to trust in him. Exactly as the Lord said, we're going to have to many times take up our crosses and follow in his footsteps.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think, let's say, modern man versus maybe people from the past, has a higher expectation in a sense that their request should be answered the way they'd like it answered, in the sense that
Yes.
That's the way we think today? This is fair. This should be fair for me, as opposed to maybe what maybe people in the past, in the sense of how things worked when they prayed and the response they might have gotten or not gotten from God, at least how they interpreted that.
Oh, I totally agree that today the expectation level is not just a little higher. I think the expectation level is over the top higher. I think it comes from a variety of different things. First of all, we do not know the same level of hardship as children. At least in our culture. There are other cultures which do know the same level of hardship that really even existed in the 1940s and 50s, right? So that this idea, that there's maybe a quick fix, that there's, you go to the doctor, or, mom is going to come back with some solution, or if I have a problem at school, maybe I can get something modified. I mean, so I think there was a greater need for self-discipline, a greater need for creativity in the midst of some real hardship, a greater need for adaptability and flexibility to move around and move through situations of great challenge. I think that was there to a much greater degree than it is today. Obviously, it's great to live in a privileged time where children can grow up without a great deal of need for challenge, for sacrifice, for discipline, for creativity to move through and around those challenges. There is something good about that, but at the same time, there's something which kind of undercuts the development of the human being. And we've seen, countless psychological and psychiatric studies, countless numbers that show that our kids are not as fully developed in those areas of the ability to make sacrifices, the ability to work with challenging situations, the ability to keep the frustration low, the ability to be creative when faced with a challenge. These kinds of things definitely have been kind of, well, let's say these are essential disciplines of life which have been more or less undermined. And then when you top that off with feelings of entitlement, I'm entitled to a cure, I'm entitled to money that other people have, et cetera, I'm entitled to the quick fix. This leads to what I call, the very, very early frustration syndrome and the early envy syndrome. And what I mean by that is when you have a sense of quick fix and entitlement, what winds up happening is that your frustration level, which might have been at an 8, for a kid maybe in the 1930s and 40s who's been around the proverbial block of a economic depression and a war, it might have been 8 or even 9, the so-called greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw put it, right? Now that has been really moved to about a 2 or 3, and then with the frustration level, right? I mean, people are just flash angry, that idea of, I got to keep a cool head. I can get around this challenge. I know there are ways of dealing with this. I know there are things I can learn from this. That sort of discipline, that sort of thinking process and creativity is really kind of absent. And what's taken its place is very, very quick frustration, quick flash of anger. And the other problem with entitlement is, the sin of envy. I mean, it just, if somebody else has something I don't have, what we say is, instead of thinking, well, okay, is this really worth it, or does this person really have an advantage? The immediate thing is to leap to, that's not fair, right? Because life should be perfectly fair. Nobody should be advantaged in the way, in a way that I'm not advantaged. And so once you've leaped to that conclusion, then it's okay not only to be envious, but to be resentful and hateful, to hate the other person because they have that advantage, and then to seek some form of retribution, to take away what the advantage they have, right? And of course, people say, well, how come, people think that cheating is okay today? Because envy justifies it. Okay. People who are smarter, I've got a right to have the same grade they do, and therefore I better cheat to get it. And so this is, you look at it and you go, right, how can this be happening? But the Josephson Foundation shows pretty clearly this decline in ethical thinking, and this decline in what's called virtue discipline, right? It's pretty clear from those studies that it's being lowered, and it's being lowered because of the quick fix and because of entitlement. Okay. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. Sorry, well, I started bloviating. Yeah,
no, it's interesting because it made me think of that, and also just the idea. Yeah. So do you see, and I don't want to take us too far afield here, but the idea of, do you see a connection as well to the drop in the ethical side in relation to either a different view of God's role in our life, or the fact that there isn't a God, or those kinds of things?
Oh, you mean, yeah. I mean, that's another source of ethical decline, because if you are really hazy about the fact that God is real and present in your life, loves you, has great expectations for you, is trying to call you to a life of love and virtue. If you don't have that sense of how real and present God is, I would say that then you won't feel very responsible to a moral agency outside of yourself. And that kind of that sense of moral agency, a conscience that really has a God behind it, to which I am responsible. If you don't have that sense, I would say that would severely weaken our moral sensibility. I mean, even Immanuel Kant would agree with this, right? And so forth. I mean, not just St. Thomas Aquinas, right? I mean, you get people who say, yes, the idea that God is present to consciousness conscience is very important to giving conscience its appropriate sway. Yes, conscience can make us feel guilty or make us feel ennobled if we're doing something bad or something good, respectively, right? But conscience, the feelings of conscience, the power of them is the recognition of the voice behind the guilt, the voice behind the nobility. If it's God's voice, that it's God who's present in those feelings of deep guilt or self-alienation when I'm doing something wrong, or in those feelings of nobility and the, the being, one with the project and the will of God, if it's His voice, it absolutely enhances the sense of ethical responsibility. There was a very, very good study that was done by a fellow named Parbatia and 10 other authors. And strangely, it was published in like a journal of business. But it was really a study of ethics and religion. And he really has an excellent scholarly apparatus. And what he shows in this study is that if you, people who are religious in orientation, that is to say, they really do believe God is real and present in their lives, when it comes, it's not can they think about ethics better, it's when they confront an ethical situation, will they do the wrong thing or not do the wrong thing? The religious person has a much higher possibility of refusing to do the wrong thing according to their conscience at the moment of the decision. And what he found is that the non-religious person did not. So it's called, the fellow's last name is Parbatia. It's a very well-known study, and I can, send it over to people who want, if you just give me an email.
Okay, great. Thank you, Father. And again, I don't want to go too far afield, but it just struck me that there was some topics there and questions that you brought out that I thought were good for us to talk about. Here's another email from us, from last week. This person writes to us, the last episode, Who God Is and Is Not, and again, that's another chapter from your book. I'm having trouble seeing your viewpoint that our God is not a quote-unquote disgusted God, and you talk about that in the book. We see so many cruel and perverse actions in our world through our mainstream media. It's hard to see that He wouldn't be disgusted. Please clarify this further. And that's Ann Lee. And again, that's something you spoke about on the show, but was also featured in your book. Right.
Yeah, and maybe I might start with a good old distinction from St. Augustine and followed later by St. Thomas Aquinas about judging the act versus judging the person. And in my book there, I was really talking about God judging people, the person, and specifically you, the sufferer. So does God judge our actions? Of course He judges our actions, and of course we are, judging our other people's actions and are allowed to do that, right? But when it comes, so can God be disgusted if I'm doing by the action I'm doing? Sure. Can God be worried about an action that I'm doing? Absolutely. No question about it. I used an analogy, about a year ago on the show here. God is like, a father who walks into, the bedroom of his little baby, and he notices that there is a snake, let's call that snake Sin, right next to his baby in the bassinet. And of course, what does he do? He doesn't get mad at the baby. He doesn't get disgusted at the baby, that the baby has, as it were, now of course the baby's innocent, I know that, but I mean the point I'm trying to get to is God's attitude. He's much more focused on the snake and getting that snake out of there. He is worried about the baby, but he, of course, is disgusted by the snake. Now, the same thing holds true, right, for St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas' distinction. The idea then is, yes, of course God can be disgusted, as it were, by violations of the commandments, but is God disgusted at you? Because you're falling for this sin? And the answer is no. Nowhere do you, now in the New Testament do you see that God is revolted by a person, disgusted by a person, or something of that nature. True, there have been people, some very well-known preachers, right? Jonathan Edwards, for example, who used this analogy all the time. He was very, one of the,
fire and brimstone,
Puritan, fire and brimstone preachers here in the United States and the New World, and he would say, yeah, God's disgusted and revolted by you, but you're not going to find that in Jesus. You're not going to find that in the New Testament. You're not going to find that, directed at a human being, in the Gospels. What you are going to find, of course, is that God, doesn't. It can be disgusted by an action, but never, ever, ever by one of His beloveds. Never, ever, ever, even by a beloved who's allowed themselves to be seduced into the darkness really far by horrible and heinous and disgusting acts. What He's going to do is try at all times to rescue them, to bring them out of there, and He's going to do it by any means and pedagogy. Of course, that's good, but He can He can be scary in the sense of trying to frighten us by the sin, but not frighten us by Him, His presence. He is all yes, says St. Paul, not no. He is all loving, not disgusted. He's not, the prodigal son's father doesn't rush out to meet the boy and go, oh my gosh, you've been living with the pigs? I'm disgusted. Get out of here. Oh my gosh, you spent all the money on prostitutes? You're kidding me. You gotta get out of here. You're ritually impure. You've embarrassed me, embarrassed God, embarrassed the religion. I'm tired of you. The prodigal son's father, who represents God, rushes up to his son, throws his arms around him, and kisses him. So just a quick distinction between act and person. Yes, God, of course, can be disgusted by black and dark acts. And, Jesus has defeated Satan, but He is not disgusted by anybody, even those perpetrating the darkest of dark things. He is trying to get them out of their misery and darkness, out of a sheer act of unconditional love.
Very good, and that's something we should all take to heart. Thank you so much, Father. We're going to take a break here, as we have to, at EWTN, as Father Spitzer's Universe continues. Much more ahead as we talk about the light shines on in the darkness, and we get into the chapter itself. Stay with us. And we continue right in the heart of Father Spitzer's Universe, and we're talking about the light shines on in the darkness. We're into chapter 3. We've been answering some questions that Father certainly has, but we're going to move ahead on to chapter 3. And Father, there you are. And maybe I can ask you a little bit to kind of set that up, and let me a couple of things in that chapter as we get into it. And one of the things right in the beginning of the chapter, it talks about the idea, and we hear about this as something that comes up many times, which has to do with basically Job and the story of Job. And people say, oh my Lord, this guy's got problems like Job. How could this person, who's such a wonderful person, be suffering so badly? And in some ways, it seems to be that many of us today feel like we're being treated like Job. Like, after all the good things I've been doing, how come things aren't working out so well? This chapter 3, I'm with you always. Third foundation, recognizing God's presence in our suffering. And then in this, you talk about the Old Testament view of suffering. And why don't you tell us a little bit, what is the Old Testament view of suffering?
Yeah, there were several strands of interpretation of suffering in the Old Testament, and a lot of them are actually represented in Job, and that's probably the best book to use. It is a wisdom book, so it's not a prophetic book, it's not a historical book, it's a wisdom book, and it's about a character
let me ask
who
you,
represents
Father, let me ask you this question, just for so many of us out there. When we say you're making a distinction, and for many people they may not understand, what is the point of the distinction you're making? You're saying it's not the prophetic book,
because
it's not this. Go ahead.
Yeah, you don't want to take this as historically literal, right?
Okay.
Job is a story that's meant to convey wisdom. If it were like a historical book, then you would want to credit it with some historical veracity. But here the point is to write what's called wisdom literature. So you're going to write a story, and there's going to be a message in the story. And Job, of course, is probably one of the best known pieces of wisdom literature that we have. So we're not talking about the real person Job who lived at XYZ time and so forth. What we're talking about is the character Job, and everybody in Old Testament times knows this is not a historical, this is the character Job in the story, and they realize that, and they realize that Job starts off as a wisdom figure. And then there's also going to be all kinds of Job's friends who are also wisdom figures who are going to, give other advice about the interpretation of Job's suffering. And the way that the book is written, or the book of Job is written, is that Job is configured as the just man. And the reason for that is because the question that the Israelites are asking is, well, why would a just man suffer? And why would they be asking that question? Because if you look at the earlier teaching, this is before Job, so this is going to be before 700 BC. If you look at the earlier teaching in the Old Testament, you're going to notice that there is the idea of suffering is retribution for past sins. So the earliest idea of why do people suffer is that somebody had to sin. And it used to be thought that, if you have a guy who's very prosperous, then somebody was doing good things. Why? Because God doesn't ever work through natural forces, right? Because in Old Testament teaching, there's not an idea that God has, works through natural forces that can kind of, be operative, independently of God. God has put them in motion to sort of operate in a perpetual and consistent sort of way, right? They don't have that idea. They think that God's continuously interacting. And the second thing is they think, well, God is just, and they have this idea that suffering is opposed to love, and is opposed, therefore, in injustice to the just man. So the only way you're going to be able to solve that is say somebody had to sin. And of course, people say, well, that guy didn't sin. So, and we see in Leviticus and Exodus, right? We see the several passages. Oh, that's because his father sinned, and he's paying well, his father didn't sin either. Well, that's because his grandfather sinned. And you go, well, no, grandfather didn't. Well, then it was his great-grandfather. So that you go down to the fourth generation. So God is still punishing sins down to the fourth generation. Now, by the time you get to Job, right, things have developed. And so people are going, okay, it's true, maybe suffering is a punishment for sin, but is there anything else here? Is there any other possible explanation for why this super just man, is suffering, and he didn't do any sins, and doesn't look like his father committed any sins either. The story's all set up so that basically you're going to elude that old view, that Old Testament view. It's being developed, and of course, two additional answers are coming out right at the beginning. The first is that the devil is having a contest with God. Now, in 700 BC, the idea of the devil is still not the malevolent spirit. It's coming around, right? But Jesus is going to give this view of the devil a huge boost. But prior to the time of Jesus and prior to the time of Daniel, the idea of the devil as being a pure malevolent spirit, and Daniel, by the way, is a very late book in the Old Testament. Prior to those times, basically the devil was thought to be kind of like a lawyer angel, an advocate angel in the court system, of the heavenly court, and he would be, he'd argue the case against Job. Okay. And so, we want to make sure Job is really just. Right. So, you say he's just, and he looks just because you have treated him with prosperity. Right. The devil, I'm going to take all that away from him, and we'll just see how Mr. Job does. And so, of course, God, wants this to be a fair court battle. So he said, okay, I'm going to take it away from Job, the prosperity, etc. So all the various afflictions happened to Job. Now that's one thing. Jesus is not going to retain that either. So Jesus does not retain the view that that suffering is a punishment from God, and certainly not to the fourth generation. So that's not, he's not going to appropriate that. Number two, Jesus is not going for the first Job explanation that the devil was in a kind of a legal argument with God, and basically said, I need to really test Job's faithfulness to see whether he was really just. And look, see, he's breaking down already. He's not the person you say, etc. So Jesus doesn't go for that. There's a third, though. Right when we get to the Elihu discourses in Job, these are the later discourses, right? Now we have another figure, and this does not belong to the original book of Job. Oh, okay. The book of Job has three phases in it, and the latest phase, the last phase, which probably comes around 400 to 500 BC, is introduced by another very important wisdom speculator, but we don't know who that wisdom writer is. But anyway, he introduces these Elihu discourses, and Elihu has two explanations. Number one, that suffering is medicinal, and Jesus is definitely going to retain that view. So the idea that suffering is not opposed to love necessarily. So this later view is that no, suffering could actually lead to love. Suffering can lead to a benefit for Job. Suffering can purify Job's intentions and love. So there's something medicinal in suffering, and that comes out in the first Elihu discourses. But in the second Elihu discourses, you get the kind of final explanation in the Old Testament. And Jesus also retains this one. You have to be, as a human being, really, 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 really humble before God, and you're going to have to trust in God's justice and love, because you simply don't know. And so remember, Elihu chastises Job, right? He says, Job, when you say you've been treated unfairly, who do you think you are? You think you know it all? You really think you know who you touch and who you're gonna touch, and how your life influences the world, and how the suffering impacts your life? You really think you know it all? You don't know anything. You're so limited. You are completely over your skis. He doesn't say that, obviously, but you're basically, your attitude is completely arrogant. You have to stop this right now. And the fact that you are whining that you've been treated unfairly, and indeed, from all external viewpoints, it looks to be so. How do you know what the Lord can do? How do you know the good that He can bring from it for you and for the people around you? How do you know? And of course, that's kind of the end, right? You know, Job ends on this thing of, you better be humble because you don't know, you're merely a creature. Now, Jesus kind of says, yes, that's important to have that humility and that obedience to take up your cross and follow in His steps. But Jesus makes two significant alterations to the book of Job. Remember, in the Old Testament, even at the time of the Elihu discourses, you do not have yet a view of resurrection. It's not there. This is going to be coming much later, probably around 300, let's say, BC, and then you're going to be starting to see the influence of Hellenistic thought with respect to the immortality of the soul, and the influence of the later prophets, specifically Daniel, you know, and his view, you know, of a resurrection, and of course the book of the Maccabees, which by that time certainly believes in an afterlife with God and so forth. So this idea then of resurrection is not around in the book of Job. Jesus is going to make a radical correction of that, because of course suffering is not about this world alone. Suffering is about the resurrection into eternal love and joy. Therefore, suffering for Jesus has a lot to do with eternal resurrection and joy. It's going to, first of all, purify our souls in faith and in love, so that we're not kind of left, you know, at the stage of a perpetual child, you know, but we're ready to rise to a challenge. We're ready to sacrifice ourselves for something noble. We're ready to sacrifice ourselves like Jesus, just in sheer obedience to the Father, realizing that in all of these sacrifices, in all this purification of faith, in all this purification of love, we are moving ever more closely. We are being ever more deeply purified in our suffering towards salvation. That's not going to be present in the book of Job. It's just because they don't have a view of resurrection. They certainly don't have a view of resurrection into unconditional love, into the human community. They simply don't have it. And so, of course, Jesus has to reconfigure suffering. The cross is always seen within the context of the resurrection for Jesus, but not so the book of Job. There's a second element, and I don't want to just go on and on here, but this is really important, is that in the book of Job, because you don't have, you know, this idea of suffering for, for the sake of the eternal salvation, you're not going to have the idea of offering up, excuse me, offering up suffering for somebody else's salvation. Offering up suffering for the church, or the mystical body. That whole idea really kind of assumes, again, the resurrection. But then the self-offering can be freely made. I'll offer myself, right? So when Jesus takes his whole doctrine of the resurrection, puts it over the fourth suffering servant song of Isaiah 52:13 through 53:12, and his dying words, Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" which is the song about the suffering servant that leads to the resurrection, that leads to the salvation of the world, past, present, and future, Jew, Gentile, etc. When you see this, then it makes, now suffering has its full context. but it's not there in Job. So Jesus only retains two dimensions of the interpretation of Job: the one that's medicinal, and the second one, be humble, you don't know.
Right.
But he adds the other two. This is for the sake of the resurrection and the sake of helping other people toward the resurrection, the growth in faith and love. And secondly, so that we can make of ourselves and our lives and our suffering a self-offering to God, which is an act of love, which God can pour upon the world as needed for the salvation of the world.
Yes.
And that's really what Jesus is doing. And it's a much more complete view of suffering. And then, of course, he really does supersede completely the idea of retribution down to the fourth generation.
Well, let me ask you, as you mentioned in here, three common misinterpretations of suffering that imply a false notion of God. As you were going, God uses suffering to punish us, God uses suffering to toughen us up, and God is indifferent to our pain and challenges. That's a false understanding.
Yeah.
Later on in the book, you talk about, under the section Suffering and the Sin of Adam, it says here, yet the question remains, why didn't Jesus and the book of Job appeal to the sin of Adam to explain suffering? Why did they give so many other alternative explanations?
Yeah, sometimes people, try to give the simple answer to the problem of suffering. And they go, well, the reason they're suffering is because Adam committed the original sin. And right after Adam committed the original sin, then we have the, sin is, suffering is going to be in the world. There's going to be this enmity between between man and nature, because of Adam's sin, and so we just have to expect that there's going to be a lot of suffering. End of story. But no, that's not the end of the story, is what I'm saying. Is no. This goes all the way back to the Old Testament. It's not just Christians who are asking this, right? You just can't say sin of Adam in a story. No, you have to say, wait a minute. What about the question Job is legitimately asking? Okay, there's suffering in the world. Now, why in the world does God allow that to happen to a just person? So at the very same time, right, there's the idea you have two conflictual notions of suffering. You've got the Genesis view that there's suffering in the work of Adam, but you also have the view that God does not allow a just man to suffer. The suffering is a punishment from God for sin. So the idea then is, even in the New Testament, you have this conflict. Why? And the question, of course, comes up. Why does God allow the just man to suffer? And that's the question, right? Job is not going to just say, sin of Adam. He's going to say, no, God promised us through Moses that if we kept the Torah and we kept the covenant, we're going to be spared suffering. You better tell us why we're keeping the covenant and there's still suffering. Why is that happening? That's what Job is trying to do. And the reason I'm trying to be so passionate is because the Israelites are asking this question very passionately. They want to know, because they go, hey, I'm a righteous man. How can this happen to me? I've been doing everything right. How can this happen to me? And of course, you look at Job, and there's a partial explanation, part of which is invalid, or Jesus supersedes it. It's not invalid, just Jesus supersedes it. But then you've got the other dimension, right? And the other dimension is resurrection, 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 self-offering, self-offering, self-offering. And Jesus brings the whole medicinal view like to a whole new level, exponentially, a higher level. And so we see, with Jesus and Christianity itself, a much, much higher view of suffering. Additionally, what Christianity does, and now Jesus didn't do this explicitly, but what Christianity did was it essentially allowed for the idea of secondary causation. It's Jesus that basically, kind of allows, this philosophical reflection to occur when he says, God causes his sun to shine on the just and the unjust, and his rain to fall on the good as well as the evil. So he's saying, hey, good things are going to happen to evil people. Bad things are going to happen to righteous people. And then you go, well, we've got all these theological explanations, but also he's opening the door to a natural explanation that he does not give. Later on, what we see is that the Christian church borrows from Plato and especially from Aristotle. And Aristotle very much has the notion of secondary causation, that God, the unmoved mover, gets the other subsidiary movers underway. But once they're underway, all of their interactions are natural and predictable interactions, right? Well, not all of them, because there can be accidents, but a lot of them are natural interactions. And then St. Thomas Aquinas is going to borrow this, and when he borrows it and puts it into his view of secondary causation, right? God's the first cause, and God is continuing all the secondary causes in being at every moment that they exist. However, those secondary causes can act according to their appropriate end, as it were, simply by existing, by God giving them their existence. He doesn't have to force them to do what they do. He's already given them the intrinsic power to do what they do as he keeps them in existence. Now, once you've got that out the door, as Stanley Yockey, great Benedictine, philosopher of science and physicist, he was a Benedictine priest, but also first-rate scientist. He basically says this is the origin of the natural sciences, right there through the open door of Christianity, specifically through the idea of secondary causation, which adds a further dimension to the whole theology of suffering, that God allows natural causation to take its turn most of the time. Of course, there are miracles, but most of the time, he's not going to perform a miracle, only on special occasions where his providence warrants it, that something good will happen, and secondly, that that nobody's salvation is going to be harmed by it.
Right. You say on page 151 in that chapter, miracles interrupt the possibility of rational expectations and therefore the process of rational decision-making intrinsic to freedom.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly correct, because if God's, as I was saying a little earlier, if God is performing a miracle every 5 seconds, right, or a million miracles a minute, I mean, we would have no idea what would befall us in the next second. So, I mean, essentially, we would be powerless to predict our future. And if powerless to predict our future, let's face it, we can't be free. You have to have some sense of what's going to befall you in order to make a rational decision. And rational decision is intrinsic to human freedom.
Now, you point out also, and you're talking about examples like that of St. Paul are difficult to find because the vast majority of suffering that happens to saints and ordinary Christians comes from the usual three non-divine causes, which are our choices, others' choices, and nature. So is that what we're dealing with?
Yeah. That's what we're dealing with. I mean, first of all, God is going to allow us to be free. Well, first of all, he's going to maintain those natural forces, right? He's going to let them do what they do so we can make rational decisions. He's going to let them do what they do so that we can have challenges in our lives, and those challenges are going to be very good for us. They're going to make us interdependent. They're going to help us, to help one another. They're going to induce us to have an act of compassion for someone in need or someone who's vulnerable, or for us to accept an act of compassion when we're in need and we're vulnerable. All these things are the benefits of suffering that may be caused by the natural world. Maybe a gene deficiency, or a drought, or a volcano volcano or whatever it may be. But you have the other side of the equation as well. God's going to allow Hitler to do terrible things to other people, and he's going to allow that criminal to shoot another person because he can't lobotomize everybody who's going to commit a sin, because if he does, then essentially he is not giving us the freedom to love, or the freedom toward unlove, that is, toward sin. He is simply forcing us to be loving. And if he forces us to be loving, because we have no option to commit a sin, we have no option about, doing something evil or something that will cause suffering to somebody else. If we don't have that option, our love is not our own.
Right, that's the trouble.
It didn't initiate
Father,
from within us.
we're out of options for this show. They've optioned us out, or we're out of time, so we have to end it right there as we continue talking about the book. I'm sure we're going to continue in this chapter the next time we get together. Thank you so much, Father. Don't forget your wonderful book, of course, The Light Shines Out in the Darkness, is what we're all talking about. People can check that out at EWTNRC.com. Thank you so much. And Father's other books. And, of course, we've also got Mother's book as well that's available. And don't forget that EWTNRC.com for all items, themagiscenter.com, EWTN's own website. Check it out there as well. There's so much in Father Spitzer's universe to be explored, and we will explore more of it the next time we see you right here.